26 years ago, I carried Gask off a burned transport in one hand. She was smaller than my boot. Her whole litter was dead around her, and she wasn't crying the way pups are supposed to cry. She was just watching me, working out whether I was the thing that had killed her family, or the thing that hadn't. I fed her from a glove finger for 11 days before she'd take meat from an open palm. Today she stands taller at the shoulder than any hound Camp Redgate has ever bred, and she was going to decide, in front of the whole garrison, whether 26 years had meant anything at all. Retirement day, my last one in uniform. Commandant Farron had the ceremony laid out like a supply manifest. Inspection, transfer of pack custody, my discharge papers, in that order, on that clock. Farron liked order the way some men like a drink. He'd told me twice that week that sentiment wasn't a training method, and I'd told him twice that he was right, it wasn't, and left it there. No sense arguing with a man holding your pension. The recruit he'd assigned Gask's line to was Private Rhea Wick, 22 years old, quiet, hands like a bird's. The kind of hands Farron didn't trust around something with teeth that long. He'd said as much in the mess hall, not quietly. Said the pack needed a handler with command presence, not a girl who talked to the pups like they understood her. Camp Redgate sits at the edge of the Vale Scrub, a garrison built to look permanent and never quite managing it. Prefab walls gone the color of rust. A parade ground scraped flat out of red dirt that never stopped drifting no matter how many seasons the maintenance crews graded it. I'd spent 31 years inside that fence line, most of them at the far end near the beast pens, where the wind carried less dust and the noise of the yard didn't reach. It was a good place to raise something, quiet enough that a scared animal could learn the shape of a routine before the rest of the world came asking anything of it. They understood her fine. I'd been letting her sit in on the evening feed for 8 weeks. Off the record, because I was tired, and my knees were tired, and because somebody was going to have to do this after me, whether Farron approved the paperwork or not. I never taught her orders. I taught her the hum I do low in my throat before I open the gate, so nothing startles. I taught her to offer the back of her hand first, never the palm, and to let the pup close the distance instead of closing it for them. I taught her to sit on the ground with the young ones instead of standing over them, because standing over a Terror-Hound pup is the first thing they teach you not to do in the manuals, and the first thing I unlearned. I taught her that Gask doesn't answer to volume, never has. She answers to a particular stillness, the kind you can't fake, the kind that says, I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not asking you to be afraid of me either. Some evenings Wick asked why I bothered, off the books, unpaid, with my knees the way they were. I never had a good answer beyond the truth. Somebody was going to inherit that pen whether Farron signed off on it or not, and I'd rather it be somebody who'd sat in the dirt with them than somebody reading a manual over the fence. The whole garrison turned out for the ground review, 300 troopers in formation, Farron up on the platform with his aide reading the transfer order like scripture. Gask came out on a lead she didn't need, her 6 pups behind her in a loose scatter, already big enough that the youngest ones bumped the knees of the color guard. Farron read the order. Pack custody transferred to Private R. Wick, effective this hour, by command authority. He said by command authority, like the words themselves would do the work. He called Wick forward first. That was his mistake, if you want to call inheriting a taught language a mistake. He wanted her standing at his shoulder when he gave the formal command for the pack to advance and present. Spectacle, a photograph for the recruiting packet. He raised his hand to signal her over, quick, the way you'd wave in a junior officer, and he took 2 fast steps toward her, to close the gap himself. Gask moved before I did. She didn't lunge. She didn't need to. She simply put herself, unhurried, between Farron's advancing stride and the recruit. 400 pounds of muscle, and old scar tissue arriving in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Head low, ears forward, a sound coming out of her chest that wasn't quite a growl, and wasn't quite anything a man wants pointed at him twice. 300 troopers went dead silent. I watched Farron's raised hand stop in the air like it had hit glass. He was not a stupid man. He stood very still and let his hand come down slowly, the way you learn to when something bigger than your rank is deciding what happens next. "Sergeant," he said, without looking away from her, "control your animal." "She's not mine to control anymore, sir," I said. That was the whole point of today. I gave the hum, low, in the throat, The same 3 notes I'd given her the first week I had her, before she'd trust a hand near her face. Gask's ears came back around toward the sound, found me, found that it wasn't a threat, and settled half an inch. Then, and this is the part that undid the commandant more than the growl ever did, she turned from me, deliberate, unhurried, and walked the last 4 feet to Wick instead. Put her skull down against the recruit's chest, the way she used to put it against mine, when she was small enough to fit in a jacket. The girl didn't flinch, didn't reach for a weapon, didn't do anything but put both hands on either side of that enormous head and go still with her. The exact stillness I'd taught her. The one that isn't fear and isn't performance. The pups came next. All 6, tumbling out of formation, ignoring the commandant standing 4 feet away in his pressed collar, piling around Wick's boots and hands and knees like she was furniture they'd always owned. One of them, the smallest, the one Farron had called the runt with no discipline in her, not 2 weeks prior, climbed straight into Wick's lap and went to sleep there, in front of 300 troopers, on retirement day, on a review platform, in 11 seconds flat. Nobody laughed, nobody dared, with Gask still standing that close, with her ears still half back. But I saw 24 faces in that formation working very hard not to. Farron's aide, a young captain named Osric who'd clearly been given no script for this, cleared his throat and said, into the silence, that this would need to be noted in the operational record as an anomaly. "It's not an anomaly, Captain," I said. "It's the only thing that ever worked. I just never wrote it down, on account of nobody asking me to." Farron didn't answer that. Couldn't really, standing where he was standing, in front of who he was standing in front of, with his hand still half raised from where the pack had stopped it. He straightened his collar, looked once at Wick, sitting on the ground now, with an alpha's skull in her lap and a sleeping pup in the crook of her arm, and said, in the flat voice of a man salvaging what he could, that the transfer would be recorded as successful, and that Private Wick's method, he used the word method like it cost him something, would be reviewed for garrison-wide instruction. Osric wrote it down right there on the platform, because somebody had to call it something for the file. What went into the operational log that afternoon, in Farron's own hand, was 3 words. Chosen, not assigned. I've seen a lot of doctrine phrases coined by officers trying to explain why the regulation didn't survive contact with the truth. That one, at least, had the decency to be honest. I signed my discharge papers on the corner of that same platform an hour later, using Gask's flank as a writing surface because nobody had thought to bring a table. She let me. Old habit, I suppose, or maybe just good manners toward the man who used to feed her from a glove. I walked off Camp Redgate's parade ground that evening, a civilian for the first time in 31 years, and I didn't look back to see if the pack was watching me go, because I already knew they weren't. They were settled around Wick's boots in the long shadow of the barracks, Pups half asleep, Gask's head resting against the recruit's shoulder, exactly the way it used to rest against mine, 26 years, handed off in 11 seconds, to a girl with quiet hands and no interest in being obeyed, only in being trusted. That's the only kind of command that ever held with that hound. I just got to keep it a little longer than most men get to keep anything.